tell you what, I'm going to leave my screen in the background. Hold on. I'm going to leave it in the background in case somebody asks about a slide. I'll just leave it in the background. Anyway, any comments? I've been talking. I'm going to look, Joanne, Floyd, Pamela, anybody has a comment, question. I'm going to say hello to everybody. Joanne, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
So, I mean, the first question I have is, could this possibly be what we're seeing here is an example of what was called antibody-dependent immune enhancement, which was one of the things that had been observed in some of the previous animal studies with some coronavirus vaccines. And so I don't know. I'm just wondering, could that be what happened in this case?
You know, it's certainly possible. Now, the thing is that so let me back up and kind of restate the question for our people in the audience, in the chat room. So the antibody-dependent immune enhancement, and somebody referred to it so that there's that syndrome, which I think is part of the syndrome of pathogenic autoimmunity. And so then the question is, and when the animal studies were done with the previous mRNA vaccines, they would use ferrets. And so the ferrets showed immunogenicity like this patient did. But then when the ferrets were exposed to the wild type virus, as this patient was, all the ferrets died. And they all had their lungs fill up, they had acute respiratory failure, and they died. And so we have a similar clinical scenario here where this patient was vaccinated, had immunogenicity, so he showed antibody response, normal antibody response. But then he was exposed to the wild virus, and they showed that it wasn't a mutant, it was the wild type virus. And he contracted it pretty aggressively because it was, in just about 24 hours, he had not just a mild infection. He was, and they emphasized that he was strongly positive. It only took a small cycle time to detect it. So he had a very high viral load in a very short period of time. So this, on the clinical side, is similar to what was seen in the animals, where you get the vaccine and you had this, autoimmunity or vaccine enhancement of the infection. And so there are different mechanisms that probably play a role into that. There's one mechanism of triggered autoimmunity, which is one thing, which may not be the case here, but viral enhancement of the infection. Dr. What's his name? The guy from overseas, Bush. Help me out, Joanne. Dr. Bosch. Dr. Bosch. I think it's Dr. Bosch. Anyway, you know who I'm talking about, right? You're muted.
If I'm sorry.
That's right.
Hitting the wrong buttons. Vanden Bosch, I think was
Vanden Bosch. Yeah, Vanden Bosch. I forget so Dr. Vanden Bosch, and he's written on this and he's spoken extensively on this, and his comment is that it's problematic, to get the vaccine in the setting of a pandemic, because one thing that happens that you force the immune system to make a specific type of antibody, but your natural immunity expresses antibodies to more global aspects of the virus. So in other words, notice they saw IgG, the spike protein, sub-1 particle, but the antibody, the virus has many different parts, and so you can have an infection that come in, and you're making one specific type of antibody, but your global immunity is suppressed because all of your energy and immune function is going toward making this antibody, because the way this vaccine works, it forces you to make more and more and more IgG antibodies of the specific type. But your natural immune system may make a spectrum of IgG antibodies, some to the sub-1 particle, some to the sub-2 particle, some to the binding component, some to the nuclear capsid of the virus, so that many different parts of the virus you'll make antibodies to. Some parts of multiple parts of the spike protein, the nuclear capsid, and other parts of the virus. But here, he's making a lot of it, all your energy and protein and stuff, and machinery is going toward making just one specific antibody when there are other antibodies that may be important. And so that's part of the mechanism. Now, again, you can't, show that case in one situation, but the data here suggests that he clearly had a severe infection with the vaccine, and he then had a rapidly onset despite antibodies to COVID. Because you would think with these antibodies hanging around, these guys are asleep or something because he got exposed to the COVID virus, and they did nothing. It did nothing. In fact, it seemed to allow him to get the infection faster and more ferociously. So that's a good point.
I thought I also noticed in there they mentioned binding antibodies, and I thought I recalled that there could be binding and neutralizing antibodies, and that was also one of the concerns that had been raised in some of the animal studies, was that you had a lot of binding antibodies created, but you didn't get enough of the neutralizing. And if I understood this paper correctly, and I might not have, but if I understood it, it sounded like there were binding antibodies, and I didn't see them neutralizing.
Well, that's correct. So what they show, now again, I can only talk about what they did show, and you might mute yourself because I think I'm coming out on the other end of your mic. Just mute and unmute. But anyway, so I think you're correct, because what they showed, the high antibody titer was to the sub-1 component of the spike protein. That's it. Your immune system, when you see the virus, it says, hey, I see your eyes look like this, your nose look like this, you got feet that's shaped this way, you got arms that's shaped, your elbows, and I'm gonna put antibodies to all of that stuff. And it does things, and it neutralizes. But plus, if you bind to a certain part of the spike protein, it doesn't necessarily prevent the vaccine from being incorporated or binding to cells and getting it encapsulated into your cells or invading tissue. As we find out here, we saw it did not prevent the virus from invading tissue because it went to the lungs and it went to several tissue sites that were COVID positive. And you would think he was for 20 days, probably 24 days. We know he was COVID negative for 20 days after the vaccine, and probably 24 days. And because on the 24th day he was exposed to his roommate, and the 25th day he was COVID positive. So we said at least 20 days. So in that period of time, he had adequate antibody formation. His immune system should have been primed and ready to go. Now, other people argue, say, well, this requires 2 shots, so you needed a booster shot, et cetera, and that's why you need to boost the shot to get a higher, immunogenicity. I don't know if that was the case with this patient because he had adequate antibodies, and you're only going to make more of the same antibodies. So enough antibodies are enough antibodies, and so this autopsy reveals a lot in terms of the inadequacy here in terms of preventing severe infection. So let's see. So Nicole is saying, clearly eager to see where you're going with this. So far, I'm not surprised. He got COVID and died. He was super unhealthy and only had 1 dose of the vaccine. Now, okay, great. Where am I going with this, Nicole? I'm glad you. Here's the bullet point. Here's my one. Did this patient die from COVID? In my opinion, yes and no. The ultimate answer, no. This patient died from being sick. Now that seems kind of crazy to say that, but let's go back to the beginning, because I like Nicole's question where I'm kind of beating around the bush. He said, hurry up and get to the point. Montgomery, I got stuff to do. Okay, I get it, Nicole. So the point is this: the patient had systemic atherosclerosis. He was anemic. He was dehydrated. If you took COVID out of the picture, I think he would have died anyway. COVID just kind of helped nudge him along. Maybe he would have died a week later, an hour later. I don't know. But COVID certainly nudged him along and contributed. But if you hydrate him, correct his anemia, then you, and of course, he's at risk for COVID infection, and he's immune compromised. Why is he immune compromised? He's not just because he's 86. He's immune compromised because he has ischemic colitis, and he probably has ischemia in other parts of the GI tract. And so his microbiome is probably abnormal, and the human microbiome contributes to the immune system. So he's immune compromised to the systemic illness and the fact that he does not have adequate blood flow to his tissue, i.e. the colon. So immunocompromisation is in part due probably the poor diet they serve him at the nursing home. That's speculation, but I think I'm right. Also the polypharmacy, that's speculation. I think I'm right. That's destroying the the microbiome. So he's immune compromised because of that. Ischemia makes it worse. He's anemic, which exacerbates the ischemia. So had he gotten hydration and blood initially, I think that would have helped him out tremendously. So the vaccine, I don't think helped him. And as Joanne alluded to, it might have even given him a disadvantage. I can't say that for a fact, but I do know it didn't help him because he contracted the infection despite that. Only having one vaccine, I don't think is a great excuse, quote unquote, because in every case, we don't quantify the amount of antibodies after the first shot. In this case, he had adequate antibodies after the first shot. The second shot was only going to give him more antibodies. That's not necessarily going to give him more immune protection. It's going to just give him more antibodies. Etc. If you hire 1,000 lazy workers and they're all standing around on the pay clock and doing nothing, do you think hiring another 1,000 workers to hang around and do nothing is going to make the job get done faster? No. And so these antibodies are just hanging around. And so they were just binding, but they probably weren't preventing anything. It may have been causing more problems. So I think this patient died due to the fact that he wasn't adequately managed, in my opinion, as many patients are not. And he had an acute flare-up. He had ischemia to his colon. He had diarrhea, and that's what led him to go. He probably had microinfarcts to other parts of his bowel. He was immunocompromised because of his systemic illness. He probably had liver dysfunction as well, but we don't have labs. We can't speak to that. But with polypharmacy, it probably contributes to that as well. So I think he died due to systemic ischemia, contributing to immune compromised state due to his bowel being abnormal. He caught a pneumonia due to his suppressed immune system, due to his chronic illness, and he did not overcome this pneumonia. I think COVID was the pneumonia, but he also had evidence of other types. So he had bacteria and other things. So other kinds of things could have caused the pneumonia and killed him as well. But COVID would not have killed him had he been better cared for, had his total body, his organ system been better treated. That's the take-home message I want to get to Nicole and everybody else. Yeah, yes, Pam, you had your hand up, and then Joanne.
I think Joanne had her hand up. I didn't have my hand up.
Okay. Yeah, all right. Go ahead.
So I had a bunch of questions come up as you were talking.
Oh, no problem.
The first is ischemia to the colon present with diarrhea? That's the first question.
Yes.
It can. Okay.
Yes.
And so then my question is, could the vaccine have played a role in that suddenly presenting or getting worse at that particular time? I'm
sorry, what's that other question again?
So if in fact the ischemia could have presented with the diarrhea, is it possible that the vaccine stirred up inflammation in a way that contributed to the blood supply getting restricted to the colon at that time? That's another question.
Okay, yeah. It's certainly possible, but here's the thing. It's hard to know. It's certainly possible. It's one of those things like you've got a lot of kids throwing rocks and a window breaks and you don't know which rock, breaks the window. And I look at the vaccine as just another rock being thrown at the window. And even though some people argue it was to protect him, but it doesn't really protect him because he's got a lot of chronic illnesses and he's at increased risk of having an acute flare-up. And to the point that you're alluding to, yes, the vaccine can cause a worsening of the problem because it's an inflammatory flare. But he might have had fried chicken the night before. I have no idea. And so if you got a lot of people throwing rocks and the window breaks, it's like, I remember I was a little kid, we were all throwing rocks and stuff. And and a window broke, and they called the police out, and we were all nervous. And nobody knew who broke the window, and it's like, we were just throwing rocks. And so, so the vaccine is one of those rocks, and could the vaccine have contributed to that? It's hard to say, but there was a 14-day period where he was asymptomatic, quote unquote. I don't know when the diarrhea started. So you certainly can't say that it wasn't a vaccine. You can't say that it was a vaccine. It's just one of many rocks that are being thrown at this unfortunate 86-year-old man.
Okay. And then here's the last question was that I noticed they documented that viral RNA was found in most of his major organs upon autopsy. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious, and I don't know if this is the case or not, but is there a way to distinguish between that RNA sequence that was discovered, to distinguish if it came from the wild COVID or if it was the vaccine RNA?
So there is a way of distinguishing. What they did say at the very beginning was that there was no mutants. They outlined certain mutants that they were negative in the test. So I don't recall whether they did that distinction in every tissue. I think they did. They said that there was no mutant found, but they weren't very clear as to whether they did that differentiation for all the tests. But I think certainly in the lungs they did it, and I suspect they did it in other tissue. But they did outline that they looked for mutants and specific ones. I don't have the ones. In fact, I'll pull up my article while we're thinking. But they clearly said that they saw mutants. They did not show any mutants. Let's see. So let's see. There was no evidence on further analysis of the swab type. Now, this was probably the nasal swab on day 25. So no evidence for mutant SARS-CoV variants of B.1.17, B.1351, or B.1.1.28.1. So there were three particular variants that they were looking for, and apparently these were variants that had been found in that environment. So those particular variants were not seen of those three, but there are other variants around that I'm not aware of. But they did look for some variants and did not see them. But that's a important question. Next, any other questions?
Was it ever said that when the last time he was tested before all this happened?
Greetings. I'm Dr. Batcha Montgomery. Thanks for joining us this evening. I want to share information about our FoodRx Healthy Lifestyle Series. The FoodRx Healthy Lifestyle Series is a comprehensive health and wellness coaching program designed to help you navigate your lifestyle towards optimal health. Do you want to reverse or control a chronic illness, or reduce or eliminate medications? You may want to avoid potential surgeries or medical procedures, or perhaps boost your immune system or improve your fitness level, or much more. The program starts with an intense 5-session, 4-week virtual coaching jumpstart phase, where you join a group of like-minded individuals dedicated to improving their health. You'll be provided a lot of support materials, including nutrition plans, recipes, supplement plans as needed, or fitness plans, or much more. You have full-year access to the support materials as well as our health and wellness team during and at the completion of the 4-week jumpstart period. To learn more about this program, connect on one of our links below or schedule a call with our team members. Let them know if you wish to speak to me directly, and they'll arrange a time for you. Optimal health is a lifelong journey. Let us help you navigate it to your most desired destination.